The first blast shook the earth so violently that for a moment it felt as if the entire valley had inhaled in fear. Dust surged upward like a storm swallowing the sun, and scattered metal rained down around the soldiers pinned behind the broken wall. It was chaos, pure, merciless chaos, and every man knew that a second blast could come at any moment. Yet in that terrifying, dust-choked silence that followed, one sound rose above the groan of twisting metal and the frantic rustle of boots scraping the ground. It was a cry. Not a soldier's cry, not one of their own. A woman's cry, sharp and trembling, echoing across the ruined road. And that was the precise second when everything changed. Because that was the moment Sergeant Elias Ward stood up straight, stepped out of cover, and walked directly into enemy fire, solely because someone he didn't know needed saving. Elias had been in enough deployments to understand the cruelty of war and the way it made time stretch, twist, and collapse in strange ways. But on that day, time didn't stretch. It snapped. One moment he was sheltering behind the shattered wall with his squad during a routine patrol, the next he was moving without a second of hesitation. The cry belonged to a civilian trapped under a toppled cart, exposed entirely in the open road where the enemy's rifles had perfect range. He didn't think about bullets. He didn't think about orders. He thought only that the sound of her pain would haunt him forever if he didn't move. With each step he took, the world shrank around him, the distant mountains, the sky thick with dust, the frantic calls from his squad, all fading until there was only his breath, his heartbeat, and the faint shape of the stranger he was risking everything to reach. Every soldier had moments they wished they'd handled differently, failures, hesitations, regrets that crawled into their sleep and changed the way they breathed. For Elias, it was a day years earlier when he hadn't been fast enough to save a boy caught in crossfire during a different mission. He had carried that memory like a stone carved into his chest. The boy's face had never left him, not for a single night. So when he heard the woman's cry, something inside him refused to relive that agony. The weight of past guilt drove his legs harder than fear ever could. He didn't care that bullets sliced the air around him like invisible blades, or that his squad screamed his name in disbelief. He cared only that he had a chance, one chance, to do something different this time. As he crossed the open road, the landscape around him felt unreal. The distant village houses looked melted by dust and sun, their colors drained to ash, the broken power lines swung like thin black ghosts in the wind. Then the gunfire erupted with renewed ferocity. Elias felt something graze his sleeve, another zip past his cheek, but he kept moving, lowering his center of gravity the way they had trained. He could finally see her clearly, a woman no older than 30, hair matted with dust, one leg pinned under the edge of the cart. Her eyes trembled with terror but also with an almost heartbreaking disbelief that someone was coming for her. Elias threw himself beside her, using his body as a shield even as the road cracked with impacts only inches away. She clutched his arm desperately, not knowing a word of his language, but he didn't need translation. He could feel the fear shaking through her like cold. He pushed against the cart with all his strength, muscles burning, lungs screaming for air. The wood groaned. The metal hinges popped and screeched. He could feel the ground trembling from the shock waves of distant explosions. For a moment it felt impossible, like lifting a wall with bare hands. But Elias refused to stop. Inch by inch he shifted the weight until her leg came free. She gasped, tears cutting paths through the dust on her cheeks. He hauled her into his arms, her breath shallow and quick against his shoulder, and he turned back toward the wall where his squad was still pinned down. It was only then he realized how far he had come, and how far he had to carry her back. The journey back was a nightmare painted in slow motion. The enemy fire intensified, each shot ringing like a cold warning across the valley. Elias kept one arm wrapped around her, the other holding her head close to his chest so she wouldn't see the bullets tearing up the road behind them. He walked in a half-crouch, feet slipping on loose gravel, the weight of her exhaustion pulling him lower with each step. He could taste blood in the air from the dust scraping his throat raw. But every time he faltered, he looked at her, shivering, crying, holding tightly to his uniform, and he forced himself forward. His legs shook violently, and pain flared in his shoulder from lifting the cart, but he kept going. He kept going because someone's life depended on him. He kept going because he had sworn a promise long before that moment, a promise without words: if I can save someone, I will. When he finally reached the protective cover of the wall, the medics rushed forward, pulling the woman from his arms as Elias collapsed to his knees. His squad surrounded him, voices frantic with a mix of anger and relief. They couldn't understand what had driven him, why he had risked everything for someone he didn't even know. But Elias knew. He felt the weight in his chest shift, just slightly, as if the ghost of that long-ago boy was watching him with a faint, approving smile. War left many wounds that no bandage could heal, but sometimes one act, one impossible act, gave meaning to all the scars. The woman survived. Her leg healed. Months later, through translators and aid organizations, Elias received a letter from her village. It contained no grand phrases, no dramatic statements. Just a simple message written with trembling hands: "You gave my children their mother back." Elias read the words many times, each time feeling something inside him unclench. It was the kind of message that stayed with a person forever, longer than medals, longer than rank, longer than fear. Years after the war, long after the dust and smoke had faded into memory, people often asked Elias about that day. They asked why he went. Why he risked his life. Why he didn't stay behind the wall like logic demanded. And Elias always answered the same way: because sometimes, the only way to save yourself from your past is to save someone else in the present. He didn't say it to sound brave. He said it because he had lived it, because he knew that courage wasn't loud or heroic, it was often quiet, trembling, and terrified, but still stepping forward. And so the story lived on, not as a tale about a soldier who defied orders or faced gunfire, but as a story about humanity surviving even in the darkest places. A story about a stranger being worth everything. A story about the moment one person's pain became another person's purpose. This was not just war. This was not just sacrifice. This was the rare, unexplainable force that makes humans run toward danger not for glory, not for duty, but simply because a life is a life, and worth saving. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the quiet bravery that still exists in this world, please consider supporting this video. Your engagement helps us bring more real, human stories to light. Special request. Comment below what part of this story moved you the most.